The sun peeked over the neatly trimmed hedges of Harmony Glen, a neighborhood known for its perfectly manicured lawns and, well, its strict rules. Everything had to be just so. And that's where Michael's troubles began. This wasn't just a story about houses, it was about a clash of personalities and a little bit of unexpected power. Michael was a friendly, easygoing guy who loved his home. He'd bought it a few years ago, dreaming of a peaceful life. He enjoyed gardening, grilling on his patio, and chatting with his neighbors. But one neighbor, in particular, made that peaceful life a little harder to achieve. Karen lived next door. She was the self-appointed guardian of Harmony Glen's perfect image. Karen saw it as her mission to make sure everyone followed the rules, down to the smallest detail. And she had a special eye for Michael's house, it seemed. From the moment Michael moved in, Karen had been on his case. A slightly overgrown rose bush. HOA violation. Trash cans left out an hour too long. Another violation. She seemed to find fault with everything. Michael tried to be patient. He'd politely correct the issues, hoping things would get better. But they didn't. Karen just kept finding new things to complain about. He'd even tried baking her cookies once, thinking a little sweetness might help. She'd thanked him politely but then sent him a notice the next day because his welcome mat was too colorful. It wasn't that Michael was intentionally breaking the rules. He just had a different idea of what was important. He valued community and friendship over perfectly aligned hedges. He believed a little bit of individuality made a neighborhood interesting. But Karen didn't see it that way. To her, rules were rules, and everyone should follow them, no exceptions. The real problem, the one that sparked the biggest conflict, was the fence. Michael decided to paint his old, weathered fence to brighten it up. He chose a nice, warm shade of blue, thinking it would add a touch of cheer to his yard. But Karen was furious. She claimed the color wasn't on the HOA's approved list and immediately filed a complaint. The HOA agreed, sending Michael a notice and a hefty fine. And that was just the beginning of the fence saga. The fines for the fence kept piling up. Each notice from the HOA felt like a punch to the gut. Michael tried to explain to Karen that the blue really wasn't that different from some of the other colors in the neighborhood. He even showed her paint swatches, but she just huffed and said, "Rules are rules, Michael." He then tried to reason with the HOA board, a group of mostly older residents who seemed to side with Karen on everything. He brought photos of other houses with similar shades of blue, but they dismissed his concerns, saying his fence was too vibrant and didn't fit the overall aesthetic of Harmony Glen. Michael started to feel like he was being targeted. It wasn't just the fence. It was everything. Karen seemed to be watching his every move, ready to pounce on any perceived infraction. He started dreading going outside, worried about what new complaint she would come up with. One day, while working in his garden, Karen marched over with a measuring tape. "I just want to make sure your grass is the correct height," she said, her voice dripping with suspicion. Michael sighed. He'd just mowed the lawn the day before. "Karen, really? Are you serious?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm. "I'm just making sure everyone follows the rules," she replied, without a hint of apology. Michael felt a surge of anger. It wasn't just about the grass or the fence. It was about Karen's constant need to control and criticize. He was tired of being treated like he was doing something wrong, when all he wanted was to live in peace. He decided he needed to do something. He couldn't keep living like this, constantly walking on eggshells. He needed to find a way to stand up for himself and reclaim his peace of mind. He thought back to his grandfather, a strong and wise man who had always taught him to stand up for what was right. His grandfather had always said, "Sometimes, Michael, you have to fight fire with, well, not fire, but you get the idea. You have to be smart and strategic." And that's exactly what Michael decided to be. He needed a plan. A good one. The fence wasn't just about the color, it was a symbol. A symbol of Karen's relentless pursuit of perfection, and Michael's quiet rebellion against it. The HOA notices arrived with alarming regularity, each one detailing a new infraction related to the blue fence. Failure to comply with approved color palette, they read. Unapproved modification to property. Potential devaluation of neighborhood aesthetics. Michael tried everything to avoid more fines. He considered repainting the fence, but the thought of giving in to Karen's demands made his stomach churn. He even looked into getting a lawyer, but the cost was too high. It felt like he was trapped. Karen, meanwhile, seemed to revel in Michael's predicament. She'd often stroll past his house, casting disapproving glances at the fence and shaking her head. Sometimes, she'd even stop and take pictures with her phone, presumably to document the offense for the HOA. One afternoon, Michael was washing his car when Karen approached him. "You know," she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy, "if you just repainted the fence, all of this would go away." Michael stopped washing his car and looked at her. "Karen," he said, trying to keep his voice even, "why are you doing this? Why are you so focused on what I'm doing with my property?" Karen's smile faltered for a moment, then returned, even brighter than before. "I'm just trying to keep Harmony Glen a nice place to live," she said. "We have standards here, Michael. Standards that everyone should follow. But aren't you taking it a little too far?" Michael asked. "It's just a fence. It's not hurting anyone. It's about the principle," Karen insisted. "If we let one person break the rules, then everyone will start breaking the rules. And then where will we be?" Michael shook his head, exasperated. He knew he couldn't reason with her. She was too caught up in her own world of rules and regulations. He turned back to his car, determined to ignore her. But he knew that this wasn't over. The fence, and Karen's obsession with it, was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. The fines were adding up to a small fortune. Michael was starting to worry about how he was going to pay them. He even considered getting a second job, just to cover the cost of Karen's obsession with his fence. He felt like he was being punished for trying to make his home look nice. He talked to a few other neighbors, hoping to find some support. Some were sympathetic, but most were afraid to speak out against Karen. They didn't want to become her next target. "She's been doing this for years," one neighbor whispered. "It's best just to stay out of her way." That made Michael even more determined to fight back. He couldn't let Karen bully him and everyone else in the neighborhood. He decided to attend the next HOA meeting and make his case. He would explain how the fence was a minor issue and how Karen was harassing him. He spent hours preparing for the meeting. He gathered photos, paint swatches, and even testimonials from neighbors who agreed that the fence looked fine. He practiced his speech in front of the mirror, making sure he sounded calm and reasonable. The day of the meeting arrived, and Michael was nervous but ready. He walked into the community center, where the HOA meetings were held, and took a seat near the front. Karen was already there, sitting with a group of her friends, all of whom were glaring at him. The meeting began, and the HOA president droned on about various neighborhood issues. Michael waited patiently for his turn to speak. Finally, the president called his name. Michael stood up and began to speak, his voice trembling slightly. He explained the situation with the fence, showed his photos, and described Karen's harassment. He pleaded with the HOA board to reconsider the fines and to put an end to Karen's behavior. When he finished, there was a moment of silence. Then, Karen stood up and began to speak, her voice filled with righteous indignation. She accused Michael of being a troublemaker and of disrespecting the rules of the HOA. She insisted that the fence was an eyesore and that he should be forced to repaint it immediately. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Michael knew this was going to be a difficult battle. The HOA board listened to both Michael and Karen, their faces impassive. They asked a few questions, mostly directed at Karen, and then announced they would take a vote. Michael's heart sank as he watched the board members nod in agreement with Karen. One by one, they voted to uphold the fines and demand that Michael repaint the fence. Michael felt defeated. He had tried to reason with them, to explain his side of the story, but they hadn't listened. They had sided with Karen, reinforcing his feeling that he was being unfairly targeted. As he sat there, listening to the president announce the results of the vote, he felt a wave of anger wash over him. It wasn't just about the fence anymore, it was about the principle of fairness and justice. He stood up abruptly, interrupting the president. "This is ridiculous," he exclaimed, his voice louder than he intended. "I've tried to be reasonable, but you're not listening to me. You're just letting Karen bully me and everyone else in this neighborhood." Karen smirked. "You're just upset because you got caught breaking the rules," she said, her voice dripping with smugness. "It's not about the rules," Michael retorted. "It's about fairness. You're selectively enforcing the rules against me because you don't like me. And the HOA is letting you get away with it." The president banged his gavel. "Mr. Thompson, I must ask you to maintain order," he said sternly. "If you cannot do so, I will have to ask you to leave." Michael knew he was losing control, but he couldn't help himself. He felt like he was drowning in a sea of unfairness. "Fine," he said, his voice trembling with anger. "I'll leave. But I'm not giving up. I'm going to fight this. I'm going to find a way to make things right." He turned and stormed out of the community center, leaving Karen and the HOA board to gloat over their victory. As he walked home, his mind raced with ideas. He knew he couldn't let Karen win. He had to find a way to turn the tables on her and the HOA. He just didn't know how yet. As Michael sat on his porch, feeling defeated, his mind drifted back to his grandfather. Grandpa Joe had been a wise and strong man, always ready with a story or a piece of advice. He had taught Michael many things, but the most important lessons were about standing up for himself and planning ahead. Michael remembered one particular conversation they had had when he was a young boy. He had been bullied at school, and he had come home crying. Grandpa Joe had listened patiently, then said, "Michael, sometimes you have to stand up to bullies. You can't let them push you around. But you have to be smart about it. You have to plan your strategy." He remembered another time when Grandpa Joe had shown him how to play chess. "Chess is like life, Michael," he had said. "You have to think several moves ahead. You have to anticipate your opponent's moves and plan your own accordingly." Now, sitting on his porch, Michael realized that he needed to apply those lessons to his current situation. He couldn't just give up and let Karen and the HOA win. He needed to be smart and strategic. He needed a plan. He closed his eyes and tried to think. What resources did he have? What options were available to him? He thought about his finances, his connections, and his knowledge of the neighborhood. And then, a memory surfaced. He remembered a conversation he had had with his grandfather a few years before he passed away. Grandpa Joe had mentioned that he had made some investments in Harmony Glen. He had said that he wanted to ensure that the neighborhood remained a diverse and welcoming place for everyone. Michael hadn't paid much attention at the time, but now, the memory sparked an idea. Could it be possible that his grandfather's investments could help him in his fight against Karen and the HOA? He wasn't sure, but it was worth investigating. He got up from his porch and went inside, determined to find out more about his grandfather's investments. He knew that Grandpa Joe had left him a trust fund. Maybe, just maybe, the answer to his problems lay hidden within that trust. He started searching for the documents, a glimmer of hope flickering in his heart. This could be the key to turning everything around. Flashback, several years earlier. Grandpa Joe sat in his study, surrounded by stacks of papers and files. He was a shrewd businessman, but he also had a big heart. He had seen the way Harmony Glen was changing, becoming less diverse and more exclusive. He worried that people like Michael, people who didn't fit the mold, would be pushed out. He decided to take action. He started quietly buying up properties in the neighborhood, using various shell corporations and trusts to conceal his identity. He wasn't trying to make a profit, he was trying to protect the community. He met with his lawyer, Mr. Peterson, a kind and trustworthy man who had been with him for many years. "Mr. Peterson," he said, "I want to create a trust. A trust that will benefit my grandson, Michael." Mr. Peterson nodded. "Of course, Mr. Thompson. What are your wishes for this trust?" "I want Michael to inherit these properties in Harmony Glen," Grandpa Joe explained. "But I don't want him to know about it until the time is right. I want him to learn the value of hard work and standing on his own 2 feet. But I also want him to have the means to protect himself and his community if necessary." Mr. Peterson smiled. "That's very generous of you, Mr. Thompson. I'll draw up the documents right away." Over the next few years, Grandpa Joe continued to buy properties, carefully adding them to the trust. He made sure that Michael was well taken care of, but he never revealed the full extent of his plan. He knew that Michael was a good and honest young man, and he trusted him to do the right thing when the time came. He often thought about Michael and the challenges he might face. He knew that the world wasn't always fair, and that people like Karen existed. He hoped that the trust would give Michael the power to overcome those challenges and to create a better future for himself and for Harmony Glen. He knew that Michael had the strength and the wisdom to make a difference. He just needed the opportunity. And that opportunity was now within reach, thanks to Grandpa Joe's foresight and planning. End flashback. Michael spent the next few days poring over the trust documents, his excitement growing with each page he read. It was true. His grandfather had secretly acquired a significant number of properties in Harmony Glen, all held in trust for him. He learned that the trust gave him voting rights in the HOA, and that those rights were substantial. He contacted Mr. Peterson, the lawyer who had helped his grandfather set up the trust. Mr. Peterson confirmed that Michael was now the beneficiary and had full control over the properties and the voting rights. He explained the legal implications and helped Michael understand how he could use his newfound power to make a difference in the neighborhood. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for the following week. Michael knew that this was his chance to turn the tables on Karen and the HOA board. He spent the days leading up to the meeting preparing his strategy. He consulted with Mr. Peterson, gathered information about the HOA rules and regulations, and practiced his speech. The day of the meeting arrived, and Michael woke up feeling a mixture of nervousness and determination. He knew that he was about to make a big announcement, and he wasn't sure how people would react. But he was confident that he was doing the right thing. He was standing up for himself, for his community, and for his grandfather's vision of a diverse and welcoming neighborhood. He dressed carefully, choosing a suit that made him feel confident and in control. He gathered his documents, including the trust agreement and a list of the properties he now controlled. He took a deep breath and walked out the door, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As he walked towards the community center, he could feel the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. He knew that he had the power to change things, but he also knew that it wouldn't be easy. Karen and the HOA board wouldn't give up without a fight. But Michael was ready. He had a plan, he had the resources, and he had the support of his grandfather's legacy. He was ready to take back Harmony Glen. The community center was packed. Michael walked in, head held high, and took a seat near the back. Karen was already there, surrounded by her usual group of supporters. She glared at Michael, a smug look on her face. He ignored her and focused on the task ahead. The meeting began, and the HOA president started with the usual announcements and updates. Michael waited patiently, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew that his moment was coming. Finally, the president opened the floor for new business. Karen immediately raised her hand. "I have a complaint to make," she said, her voice sharp and accusatory. "It's about Mr. Thompson's fence. It's still not in compliance with the HOA guidelines, and I demand that further fines be levied against him." She continued to rant about the fence, her voice growing louder and more agitated. She accused Michael of being a menace to the neighborhood and of deliberately flouting the rules. She demanded that the HOA take immediate action to force him to repaint the fence. Michael listened calmly, a slight smile playing on his lips. He knew that this was his cue. He waited for Karen to finish her tirade, then raised his hand. The president, looking annoyed, reluctantly acknowledged him. "Yes, Mr. Thompson. Do you have something to say?" Michael stood up, his voice calm and confident. "Yes, I do," he said. "I have an announcement to make." He paused, taking a deep breath. "I'd like to inform the HOA board and the residents of Harmony Glen that, as of today, I am the majority owner of properties in this community." A gasp went through the room. Karen's mouth dropped open, and her smug expression vanished. The HOA board members looked stunned. Michael continued, his voice ringing with authority. "Through a trust established by my grandfather, I now control a majority of the voting rights in this HOA. And I intend to use those rights to make some changes." He paused again, letting his words sink in. "Starting with the fines against my fence. They are hereby rescinded." A wave of murmurs swept through the room. People whispered to each other, their faces a mixture of shock and disbelief. Karen sputtered, her face turning red. "That's impossible," she exclaimed. "You're lying." Michael calmly pulled out the trust documents and handed them to the HOA president. "These are the official documents," he said. "They clearly show that I am the beneficiary of the Thompson Family Trust, which owns a majority of the properties in Harmony Glen." The president, looking flustered, examined the documents. His eyes widened as he read the details. He looked up at Michael, a mixture of awe and apprehension on his face. These appear to be in order," he stammered. Karen refused to believe it. "This has to be some kind of trick," she insisted. "I demand that we verify these documents immediately." "Of course," Michael replied calmly. "Mr. Peterson, my lawyer, is here. He can answer any questions you may have." He gestured to a man standing near the back of the room. Mr. Peterson stepped forward and introduced himself, confirming the validity of the trust and Michael's control over the properties. The room fell silent. Everyone was staring at Michael, their minds struggling to process what they had just heard. The balance of power in Harmony Glen had shifted dramatically. Karen, realizing that she had lost, sank back into her chair, defeated. Her supporters looked at her with a mixture of pity and disappointment. The HOA board members, sensing the change in the atmosphere, began to shift their allegiance towards Michael. Michael surveyed the room, his heart filled with a sense of triumph and responsibility. He had faced a bully and won. But he knew that this was just the beginning. He had a lot of work to do to make Harmony Glen a better place for everyone. He intended to use his power wisely and fairly, to ensure that everyone felt welcome and respected. He would start by addressing the petty rules and regulations that had caused so much conflict and division in the neighborhood. He would create a community where people could live in peace and harmony, without fear of being harassed for minor infractions. He would honor his grandfather's legacy and make Harmony Glen a place where everyone could thrive. The silence in the room was deafening. Everyone was staring at Karen, waiting for her reaction. But she was speechless. Her mouth was still open, but no words came out. She looked like a fish out of water, gasping for air. Michael watched her, a mixture of pity and satisfaction in his heart. He didn't want to humiliate her, but he knew that she needed to understand the consequences of her actions. She had been so focused on controlling others that she had lost sight of what was truly important: kindness, compassion, and respect. The other residents of Harmony Glen were equally stunned. They had all witnessed Karen's behavior over the years, and they knew that she had often gone too far. But they had been afraid to speak out, fearing her wrath. Now, they saw that someone had finally stood up to her and won. One by one, people started to approach Michael, offering their congratulations and support. Some apologized for not speaking out sooner, admitting that they had been intimidated by Karen. Others thanked him for bringing fairness and justice to the neighborhood. Even some of Karen's former supporters began to distance themselves from her, realizing that she was no longer the powerful force she once was. They saw that Michael was the new leader, and they wanted to be on his good side. The HOA president, eager to salvage the situation, quickly offered his support to Michael. He promised to work with him to implement his vision for the neighborhood and to ensure that everyone was treated fairly. Michael accepted the president's offer, but he made it clear that he would be the one calling the shots. He intended to run the HOA with transparency and integrity, and he would not tolerate any further harassment or discrimination. He looked at Karen, who was still sitting silently in her chair, her face pale and drawn. He felt a pang of sympathy for her, but he knew that she had brought this situation upon herself. He hoped that she would learn from her mistakes and change her ways. He turned to address the rest of the residents. "I know that there are many challenges ahead," he said, his voice filled with determination. "But I am confident that we can overcome them together. We can create a community where everyone feels welcome, respected, and valued. We can make Harmony Glen a place that we can all be proud to call home." Turning his attention to the specifics, Michael outlined his vision for a new Harmony Glen. "I want to create a neighborhood where everyone feels like they belong," he explained, his voice resonating with sincerity. "Where differences are celebrated, not criticized. Where neighbors help each other, instead of trying to find fault." He emphasized that he wasn't against rules altogether. Rules are important, he conceded. But they should be fair, reasonable, and focused on things that truly matter: safety, security, and maintaining property values. They shouldn't be used to harass people or stifle creativity. He proposed a complete review of the HOA guidelines, with input from all the residents. He suggested forming committees to address specific issues, such as landscaping, parking, and noise levels. He wanted to create a collaborative process where everyone had a voice and a chance to shape the future of the community. "I believe that we can create a neighborhood that is both beautiful and welcoming," he said. "Where people are proud to live, and where they feel a sense of community. But it will take effort, cooperation, and a willingness to compromise." He specifically addressed the issue of the approved color palette. "I think it's time we updated the list of approved colors," he said, a twinkle in his eye. "I'm not saying we should allow neon pink houses, but I think we can be a little more flexible and allow people to express their individuality." He also proposed streamlining the process for approving modifications to properties, making it easier for residents to make changes without having to jump through hoops. He wanted to encourage creativity and innovation, not stifle it with bureaucracy. Finally, he addressed the issue of harassment and discrimination. "I want to make it clear that I will not tolerate any form of harassment or discrimination in this neighborhood," he said, his voice firm. "Everyone deserves to be treated with respect, regardless of their race, religion, or personal preferences. If anyone is caught engaging in such behavior, they will face serious consequences." He paused, looking directly at Karen. "That includes filing frivolous complaints based on personal animosity." His words hung in the air, a clear message that things were about to change in Harmony Glen. The era of petty rules and relentless enforcement was over. A new era of fairness, respect, and community was about to begin. Michael presented a draft of his proposed new rules for the HOA. He had worked with Mr. Peterson to create a set of guidelines that were simple, clear, and focused on the things that truly mattered. The new rules eliminated many of the petty regulations that had plagued Harmony Glen for years. There were no more restrictions on the height of the grass, the color of welcome mats, or the type of holiday decorations allowed. The focus was now on things like maintaining property values, preventing noise disturbances, and ensuring the safety and security of the residents. One of the key changes was the creation of a clear and transparent process for resolving disputes. Instead of relying on anonymous complaints and arbitrary fines, the new rules required mediation and open communication between neighbors. The goal was to resolve conflicts peacefully and constructively, without resorting to legal action. Michael also proposed a new system for managing the HOA finances. He wanted to ensure that the money was being used wisely and efficiently, to benefit the entire community. He suggested creating a budget committee, composed of residents from different parts of the neighborhood, to oversee the spending. "I believe that these new rules will make Harmony Glen a better place to live," Michael said. "They will reduce conflict, promote community, and ensure that everyone is treated fairly." He opened the floor for discussion, inviting residents to share their thoughts and suggestions. Many people spoke up, expressing their support for the new rules. They were tired of the petty regulations and the constant bickering, and they were eager to embrace a new era of harmony and cooperation. Even some of Karen's former supporters admitted that the new rules made sense. They had been blinded by her obsession with control, but now they saw that there was a better way. Of course, there were a few dissenters. Some residents were worried that the new rules would lead to chaos and disorder. They feared that people would take advantage of the relaxed regulations and let their properties fall into disrepair. Michael listened patiently to their concerns, assuring them that he would address any issues that arose. He emphasized that the goal was not to eliminate all rules, but to create a system that was fair, reasonable, and effective. He promised to monitor the situation closely and to make adjustments as needed. He reiterated that he wanted the rules to address problems that were legitimate, not imagined. He reminded them of the blue fence issue, and how ridiculous that whole situation had become. Under the new rules, that would never have been an issue in the first place. The tide had turned. For years, Karen's complaints had been the loudest voice in Harmony Glen. But now, the other neighbors finally had the courage to speak up, and their voices were overwhelmingly in support of Michael's ideas. Mrs. Davis, an elderly woman who lived across the street from Michael, stood up and addressed the room. "I've lived in Harmony Glen for over 30 years, she said, her voice trembling slightly. "And I've seen a lot of changes. But I've never seen anything like what Karen has done to this neighborhood. She's made life miserable for so many people with her constant complaining and her petty rules. I'm so grateful to Michael for finally standing up to her and for offering a better vision for our community." Mr. Johnson, a young father who lived down the street, echoed Mrs. Davis's sentiments. "I moved to Harmony Glen because I wanted to raise my family in a safe and friendly neighborhood," he said. "But Karen's constant complaints have made it feel more like a prison. I'm excited about Michael's ideas for creating a more welcoming and inclusive community." Even some of Karen's former friends and allies began to express their support for Michael. They admitted that they had been wrong to support her and that they were now ready to embrace a new era of cooperation and harmony. The HOA president, sensing the overwhelming support for Michael's proposals, called for a vote. The results were overwhelmingly in favor of the new rules. Only a handful of residents voted against them, and even they seemed resigned to the fact that change was inevitable. Michael smiled, his heart filled with gratitude. He had faced a difficult battle, but he had emerged victorious. He had not only stood up for himself but had also brought the community together. He was confident that Harmony Glen was on the path to becoming a better place for everyone. He looked around the room, acknowledging the cheers and applause from his neighbors. He knew he had a lot of work ahead of him, but he was ready for the challenge. He had a vision, he had the support of the community, and he had the legacy of his grandfather to guide him. He knew that he could make a difference. He just needed to start with the next step. Getting the new rules formally adopted. And then, maybe, he could finally repaint that fence. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to. Even after the vote, Karen refused to give up. She stood up, her face flushed with anger, and tried to argue against the new rules. She claimed that they were too lenient, that they would lead to chaos, and that Michael was destroying the character of Harmony Glen. But nobody was listening to her anymore. Her voice was drowned out by the cheers and applause of the other residents. The HOA president, eager to move on, quickly gavelled her down and called for a vote on the next item on the agenda. Karen tried to interrupt again, but the other residents ignored her. They were tired of her negativity and her constant complaining. They had finally found a leader who represented their interests, and they weren't going to let Karen spoil it. She tried to appeal to her former supporters, but they had already turned their backs on her. They realized that she was fighting a losing battle and that it was time to move on. With the new rules adopted, the next step was to elect a new head of the HOA. The HOA president, sensing the shift in power, quickly nominated Michael for the position. There were no other nominations, and Michael was unanimously elected as the new head of the Harmony Glen Homeowners Association. He stood up, his voice filled with emotion, and addressed the room once more. "Thank you," he said. "Thank you for your trust, your support, and your willingness to embrace a new vision for Harmony Glen. I promise to do my best to represent your interests and to make this neighborhood a place where everyone can thrive." And he kept his promise. As the new head of the HOA, Michael worked tirelessly to implement the new rules and to create a more welcoming and inclusive community. He formed committees to address specific issues, such as landscaping, parking, and noise levels. He held regular meetings to gather feedback from residents and to ensure that everyone had a voice in the decision-making process. He also made a point of reaching out to people who had been marginalized or discriminated against in the past. He made sure that everyone felt welcome and respected, regardless of their background or personal preferences. As for Karen, she mostly kept to herself. She seemed to have realized the error of her ways, and she no longer harassed or complained about her neighbors. She still attended HOA meetings, but she rarely spoke, and when she did, her comments were usually polite and respectful. One sunny afternoon, Michael decided that it was time to finally repaint his fence. He had been putting it off for months, but he knew that it was a symbolic gesture that would show everyone that things had truly changed in Harmony Glen. He chose a bright, cheerful shade of yellow, a color that radiated warmth and happiness. He spent the entire day painting the fence, humming to himself as he worked. Neighbors stopped by to offer their help and encouragement, and Michael felt a sense of pride and accomplishment. When he was finished, the fence looked beautiful, radiating sunshine and warmth. As he stepped back to admire his work, he noticed Karen standing in her yard, watching him. He hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to react. But then he smiled and waved. Karen, to his surprise, smiled back. It was a small, tentative smile, but it was a smile nonetheless. Michael knew that things wouldn't change overnight. It would take time for Karen to fully embrace the new vision for Harmony Glen. But he was hopeful that she would eventually come around. He spent the rest of the evening sitting on his porch, enjoying the beautiful weather and the company of his neighbors. He felt a sense of peace and contentment that he hadn't felt in a long time. He had faced a difficult challenge, but he had overcome it. He had stood up for himself, for his community, and for his grandfather's legacy. And he had made a positive change in the world. As the sun set, casting a warm glow over Harmony Glen, Michael smiled. He knew that there would always be challenges in life, but he was confident that he could face them with courage, wisdom, and compassion. He had learned the importance of standing up for what was right, of planning ahead, and of working together to create a better world. He thought of his grandfather, Grandpa Joe, and the lessons he had taught him. He knew that Grandpa Joe would be proud of him. He had honored his legacy and had made Harmony Glen a place where everyone could thrive. And as he looked out at the beautiful, welcoming neighborhood, Michael knew that he had finally found his place in the world. He was home. He was surrounded by friends and neighbors who cared about him. And he was making a difference. He smiled again, a genuine, heartfelt smile that radiated joy and gratitude. The blue fence had caused so much trouble, but in the end, it had brought about positive change. And that was something to smile about.